My name is Bill Hecht. I'm a full-time sculptor at Western Avenue Studios in Lowell, Massachusetts. I make robots out of found objects, particularly old electronic equipment. I've been doing into my art for about 10 years now. I have my studio, I moved to Western Avenue Studios 3 years ago, and my wife and I both moved to the loft apartments here last year. So we're now residents of the city of Lowell, and both have studios here and pursuing our kind of artistic passion. This particular medium sort of spoke to me after kind of years of interest in creating. I've always been what I call a tool user. I did woodworking for a long time. When I was young, I was interested in lots of different kinds of art, particularly pen and ink and pencil. I did some jewelry work for a while, and I never found anything that really resonated with me. And about 10 years ago, I kind of stumbled upon this art, and it just sort of spoke to something inside. And particularly the reason I think that this speaks to me is I've been a lifelong fan of science fiction. And when I was an 8-year-old boy, I was convinced by the time I got to be this age, I would have my own robot. And when I got here, I got a self-driving car and a Roomba, and that was not the 8-year-old's vision of what the future was supposed to be. So basically what I'm doing is I'm building the future I never got. So some of the artists that have inspired me is, there are certainly some people around here at Western Avenue. Bruce Wood down on the 4th floor, a very good friend of mine who used to have a studio here, Mark Fisher, was a graphic artist his whole life and does art very similar, or does some of his art is similar to what I do. There's another artist friend of mine who lives in Kansas City, or Lawrence, Kansas, whose name's Randy Regier, who does art similar to this. But there's also, I think one of the people that, more well-known artists that particularly inspired me was a gentleman by the name of Bruce McCall. He was a writer and an illustrator for New York Magazine. He also did some illustrations for automobiles, automobile magazines, for car companies. But he was the one who coined the phrase retrofuturism. In other words, a lot of his art was also about him drawing this sort of bizarre future that looks like something you could conceive but actually never happened. A lot of his art was done with his tongue firmly in his cheek, and I like to think that my art also emulates that, because one of the biggest reactions I get when people come in here is they smile. They enjoy it. I mean, my work has a definite sense of personality, but it also has an absolute feeling of fun, which is something I really work hard to do. So growing up, I spent a lot of time watching science fiction movies of the period, I grew up in. I'm 62 years old now. I was born in 1962. So the late 60s, or any of the movies from the 50s to the 70s. There was also another gentleman, a movie prop maker, whose name was Robert Kinoshita, and he was responsible for designing the robot on Lost in Space, and another robot from the movies called Robbie the Robot. And his work has a lot of influence, or has influenced me specifically in the things I create. The cost of materials isn't insignificant, but it's not particularly huge. Some of the material I source from eBay and from some surplus stores that I get stuff from. But since I've been here, I get a lot of material from either artists in the building or people who walk in and see my work and recognize it looks like what their basement is full of, and they bring it in. My favorite pieces of material or technology that I find are stuff that ranges between the 1950s to late 1960s, because there's something about the design aesthetic that was used in all that equipment that I find really beautiful. And the other thing about stuff that's that old is it projects a sense of wear, or a sense of use. If I get a piece that's more worn and kind of the edges are scratched up and the knobs look like they've been used a lot, that I find more compelling than something that's new, because ultimately when I finish a piece, I want it to look like something that has been used. I want it to look like a robot, for all intents and purposes, that spent its days working or doing whatever robots do for employment. I almost never paint anything. Occasionally what I'll do is a piece will need to be lightly colored, but I will almost never paint anything. I spent a lot of time looking for color aesthetic in pieces that match the overall piece that I'm going with. So there has to be a visual unity to what's done, not only in terms of proportion, but in terms of color, in terms of the pieces that I use, but I don't color things at all. I want it to treat the material that I used just in its sort of natural form. I certainly think there needs to be more art education in the world, more exposure to art, more understanding of what good art is, because I think there's a lot of bad design and we live in a world full of, I think, things that can be mediocre from a visual perspective. You know, I'm a very visual person, being a sculptor. Because art education, I mean, I was an educator for 24 years, and one of the first things that gets whacked if they're having budget cutbacks is music goes away, art goes away, you know, it's like, which is just ridiculous. I mean, I think it's ridiculous that, so when I grew up, my high school had electronic technology. There was a ham radio station in it. There was a wood shop. There was a metal shop. There was a printing shop. There was drafting, mechanical design, and a full art department, and a home economics department. Now, as part of the move towards reducing expenditures in education, those got consolidated at the technical schools. But I think taking a lot of that out of general education, out of the public school system, and just focusing on all the technical schools was a bit of a mistake. The advice I would give anybody entering the arts field, I like to quote a letter from Kurt Vonnegut, the American writer Kurt Vonnegut, who I'm kind of a fan of. And somebody asked him about writing, and Vonnegut said, it doesn't matter what you do as long as you get out and create, as long as you interact with the creative process. If you're into drawing, draw. Take lessons, but do practice your art every single day. If you're into cooking, cook. Practice your cooking every day. I think it's about being in touch. The most important advice I have for anybody that's interested in creating is to just is to engage with the process, is to get out and do it. And I think that applies to anything that's creative. I mean, reading is creative, interacting with art in some form. So I guess it's about interacting with the art. I think that's important. Having a community is really, I think, the next thing that's very important. Besides practicing your art and engaging with it on a daily basis, being part of a community. And I also think that it's important to engage with creatives who may not necessarily do what you do, because they're looking at your little box from a different box. And sometimes it's hard for us to get outside our box. And that's part of what being at Western Avenue does. It gets you outside your box. I mean, my neighbor across the street, Dave Drynan, is a Boston School classic landscape painter. And I've learned so much from David. And he doesn't build robots, and I certainly don't do landscape painting, but we all have things to add to one another. And if we don't, it's a great community to network in. So I think being part of a community, and if you can't move into a community, I was very fortunate to be able to move here, taking lessons, engaging with other artists, going to school if you can, or just connecting with people online or through social media. All of that is important to the artistic process, and I would recommend all of those things to somebody who is at any point in their career as an artist or creator. If you haven't been to Western Avenue Studios, you have to come here. The building is open every day from around 8 to 4. Our open studios are the first Saturday of every month. We're open, those open studios run from 12 to 5. There's food trucks, there's coffee at Nibbana Coffee. Navigation Brewery is open. Lowell Makes is here if you're interested in exploring that. And we have the lofts, which are our 50 artist apartment workspaces, many of which are open. Just come here and see what this place is like, because it's really, it's something special. People can find me on Instagram. I'm at _Robotorium. Currently I have a couple of pieces on exhibit at Tag Gallery in south of Washington in Boston.